The morning of December 16, 1944, began like any other freezing hell in the Ardennes forest. Sergeant William Tucker sat in his foxhole near the Belgian border, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air. At 23 years old, he looked closer to 40. War had a way of aging men faster than time itself. Tucker was different from the other boys in Baker Company. While most soldiers came from cities or farmlands with formal educations, he had grown up in the coal mines of West Virginia. His father died when he was 12, crushed under a cave-in. School became a luxury his family couldn't afford. By 13, he was working 16-hour shifts in the darkness, learning to measure distances in the pitch black by sound, touch, and instinct. The other men respected him, but they also kept their distance. Tucker had a habit that made him an outsider. He carried an old tobacco tin everywhere, the kind his father once used. Inside wasn't tobacco, though. It was filled with makeshift tools, bits of wire, a small mirror fragment, and a crude measuring device he had fashioned himself in the mine. He called it his rangefinder, though nobody really understood what it did. Lieutenant Pearson, their commanding officer, was a Harvard graduate from Boston. Everything about him screamed privilege. His perfect posture, his pressed uniform even in combat, his condescending tone. He had made it clear from day one that he had no patience for hillbilly superstitions or homemade contraptions. 3 days earlier, Pearson had caught Tucker using his tin device to calculate artillery coordinates. The lieutenant's face had turned red with fury. "You think you're smarter than our trained artillery spotters? You think that piece of trash is better than military-grade equipment?" He had snatched the tin from Tucker's hands and thrown it into the mud. "That's an order, Sergeant. Use proper equipment or face court-martial for insubordination." Tucker had picked up his tin silently, wiped off the mud, and said nothing. He had learned long ago that some men couldn't be reasoned with. But he also knew something that Pearson didn't. Sometimes survival depended on tools that couldn't be found in any manual. Now, as dawn broke over the frozen landscape, an eerie silence fell over the forest. Tucker felt at first that instinct miners develop when something is terribly wrong. The birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound. A low rumble in the distance, like thunder, but constant and growing louder. Tucker's heart began to race. He grabbed his binoculars and peered through the dense fog that had rolled in overnight. He couldn't see more than 20 yards ahead. Private Davis, barely 19, crawled over to Tucker's position. "Sarge, you hear that?" "What is it?" Tucker's jaw tightened. "Tanks. A lot of them." Within minutes, chaos erupted. German Panzers emerged from the fog like mechanical ghosts, their guns already firing. The surprise attack scattered Baker Company. Men ran in every direction, shouting orders that nobody could hear over the explosions. Trees splintered. The ground shook. Lieutenant Pearson stumbled out of his command post, his face pale with terror. He grabbed the radio, screaming for artillery support, but the coordinates he gave were useless. The fog made visual confirmation impossible. The artillery teams refused to fire blind, afraid of hitting their own men. Tucker watched as 2 Shermans from their attached tank platoon tried to engage the Panzers. They never had a chance. The German tanks were better armored, better positioned. Within seconds, both Shermans were burning wrecks, black smoke adding to the already impenetrable fog. Men were dying. Tucker could hear their screams, could smell the burning fuel and flesh. And through it all, he felt the weight of his tobacco tin in his pocket. He knew what he had to do, but doing it meant disobeying a direct order from a superior officer. In wartime, that could mean execution. Private Davis grabbed his arm, his eyes wide with panic. "Sarge, we gotta run. We can't fight what we can't see." Tucker looked at the boy, then at the chaos around them, then at the distant shape of Lieutenant Pearson still fumbling with the radio. The officer who had banned his rangefinder was now the same man watching his company get slaughtered because he couldn't provide accurate coordinates in the fog. Tucker pulled out his tobacco tin. His hands were steady despite the explosions. He had spent years in mine shafts measuring distances in complete darkness. This fog was nothing compared to that. He opened the tin and began to work, his fingers moving with practiced precision. The mirrors, the wires, the angles. Everything his father had taught him about measuring what you couldn't see. Everything the mines had beaten into his survival instincts. Lieutenant Pearson noticed and started moving toward him, rage replacing fear on his face. "Tucker, I gave you a direct order." But Tucker didn't stop, because in that moment he made a choice. He could obey and watch everyone die, or he could trust what he knew to be true, even if it meant the end of his military career. Lieutenant Pearson stormed across the battlefield, dodging explosions, his face twisted with fury. "Tucker, put that damn thing away right now. That's a direct order." Tucker ignored him. His fingers worked the wires and mirror fragments, calculating angles through the fog using sound waves and echo patterns. He had done this 1,000 times in the mines, finding his way through collapsed tunnels when all light was gone. The Panzers were firing, and each shot gave him information. Distance, direction, elevation. Pearson reached him and grabbed his shoulder, spinning him around. "You insubordinate hillbilly, I will have you shot for this." Tucker looked him dead in the eye, his voice cold and steady. "Then shoot me after I save your men, sir." The lieutenant's hand went to his sidearm. For a terrifying moment, Tucker thought he might actually do it. Around them, more men were screaming. Another explosion ripped through a foxhole 30 yards away. 3 soldiers gone in an instant. Private Davis stepped between them, his young face desperate. "Lieutenant, please, let him try. We're dying out here." Pearson's hand trembled on his holster. His perfect Harvard education hadn't prepared him for this. All his training, all his expensive equipment, all his authority meant nothing against an enemy he couldn't see. And here was this coal miner with a tobacco tin, acting like he could do what million-dollar military technology could not. The radio crackled. Artillery command asking for coordinates again, demanding visual confirmation. Pearson grabbed the radio, his voice breaking. "I can't see them. The fog is too thick. I need. He couldn't finish the sentence. The weight of command was crushing him. 27 men dead already. The number kept climbing. And all because he couldn't give them accurate firing coordinates. Tucker finished his calculations. He grabbed the radio from Pearson's shaking hands. "Fire mission. Grid coordinates. 557328. Elevation angle 12 degrees. Range 840 meters. 3 tanks information. Moving northeast at approximately 15 kilometers per hour." The artillery officer's voice came back skeptical. "Sergeant, how are you getting those numbers? We can't confirm visual." Tucker's voice was ice. "I'm getting them the same way I found my father's body in a collapsed mine shaft with no light and no air. You want to save these men or you want to keep asking questions?" Silence on the radio. Then rounds incoming. 30 seconds. Pearson stared at Tucker, his face a mixture of rage, humiliation, and something else. Fear. Not of the Germans. Fear that he had been wrong. Fear that this uneducated miner was about to prove that rank and privilege meant nothing compared to raw skill born from survival. The shells screamed overhead. Everyone held their breath. Through the fog they heard it. The unmistakable sound of metal tearing. Explosions. Men screaming in German. A direct hit. But Tucker wasn't celebrating. He was already calculating again, his tobacco tin open, his hands moving. Because 10 more Panzers were still out there in that fog. And Lieutenant Pearson had just realized he had banned the only weapon that could stop them. The first Panzer burned bright orange through the gray fog, a beacon of hope in hell. But Tucker knew one kill meant nothing. The German assault was relentless, and they were still outnumbered, still outgunned. He worked his tobacco tin faster now, his coal-stained fingers dancing across the crude instruments. Another set of calculations. Another impossible shot through the fog. He called out coordinates rapid fire into the radio. His voice steady even as mortar rounds exploded close enough to shower him with frozen dirt. Grid 557412. 2 tanks, 40 meters apart. Range 900 meters. Fire for effect. The artillery responded immediately now. They had seen the first kill. They believed. Shells screamed overhead and found their marks. 2 more Panzers erupted in flames, their ammunition cooking off in spectacular secondary explosions. Private Davis was staring at Tucker like he was witnessing a miracle. "How are you doing this, Sarge? How can you see them?" Tucker didn't look up from his tin. "I'm not seeing them, kid. I'm hearing them, feeling them. The mines taught me that darkness and fog are the same thing. You just gotta know what to listen for." Lieutenant Pearson stood frozen, watching his entire understanding of warfare crumble. Everything he had learned at Harvard, every manual he had studied, every assumption about proper military procedure was being destroyed by a man with a tobacco tin and a sixth sense born from poverty and pain. Another Panzer appeared through the fog, closer this time. Its guns swiveled toward their position. Tucker's calculations flew. He screamed coordinates. The artillery fired. The shell hit the Panzer's tread just as it fired, sending its shot wild. The German tank slewed sideways, disabled. A second shell finished it off. For Panzers down. 7 to go. Baker Company was starting to regroup now, their panic turning to fierce determination. They had watched their sergeant perform the impossible. The man their lieutenant had humiliated was now the only reason any of them were still breathing. Tucker's hands never stopped moving. Wire, mirror, angle, sound, distance. Each calculation was life or death. Each number he called out was the difference between survival and annihilation. If you're watching this and you believe in people who rise up when everything seems lost, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens next will show you that sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't the ones made in factories. They're the ones forged in the fires of human resilience. 3 more Panzers rolled through the fog in a tight formation, their commanders confident that the Americans couldn't touch them in this weather. They were wrong. Tucker called the coordinates. The artillery bracketed them perfectly. One by one they died. 7 Panzers destroyed. For remaining, Lieutenant Pearson finally moved. He walked slowly toward Tucker, his face pale, his hands no longer shaking. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I was wrong." Tucker looked at him, his tobacco tin still open in his hands. "Yes, sir. You were." The lieutenant swallowed hard. "What do you need from me, Sergeant?" Tucker's answer was simple. "Stay out of my way and let me finish this." The fog was beginning to lift, but only slightly. Enough to see shapes moving, not enough to see clearly. The remaining 4 Panzers had changed tactics. They were spreading out, trying to flank Baker Company from multiple directions. Smart. Deadly. Tucker's mind raced through calculations faster than ever before. This was the moment. If he failed now, everything he had accomplished would be meaningless. The Germans would overrun their position and slaughter everyone. He closed his eyes, shutting out the visual chaos. Just like in the mines. Just like when the explosions would blow out every lamp and you had to find your way through a kilometer of tunnels using nothing but sound and memory and faith that your instincts wouldn't fail you. The Panzer's engines rumbled from different directions. North, northwest, east, southeast. For distinct sounds, for distinct distances. His father's voice echoed in his mind from years ago. When you can't see, son, you gotta become part of the darkness. You gotta feel it like it's your own skin. Tucker's hands moved across his tobacco tin with supernatural precision. He called out 4 sets of coordinates in rapid succession, his voice rising above the chaos like a prophet delivering divine judgment. Artillery, fire mission. Multiple targets. Grid 557509. Grid 557483. Grid 557615. Grid 557397. Time on target. Execute now. The radio operator hesitated. "Sergeant, that's 4 simultaneous calculations. Are you certain?" Tucker opened his eyes. His voice carried the weight of every man who had ever worked in darkness. Every father who had died so his son could live. Every moment of suffering that had forged him into something stronger than steel. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Fire. The sky erupted. Dozens of artillery shells screamed overhead in perfect synchronization. A symphony of destruction orchestrated by a man with a tobacco tin. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, through the thinning fog, they saw it. Four massive explosions, perfectly timed, perfectly placed. The remaining Panzers disintegrated in balls of fire and twisted metal. The sound was deafening. The sight was beautiful. 11 Panzers destroyed. The German advance shattered. Baker Company erupted in cheers. Men who moments ago had been preparing to die were now laughing, crying, embracing each other. Private Davis grabbed Tucker and hugged him so hard they both nearly fell into the foxhole. Lieutenant Pearson walked toward Tucker slowly, like a man approaching an altar. When he reached him, he did something Tucker never expected. The Harvard officer, the Boston aristocrat, the man who had called him a hillbilly and thrown his father's tobacco tin in the mud, saluted him. Not the casual salute of military protocol. A real salute. One soldier acknowledging another soldier's greatness. "Sergeant Tucker," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology that words cannot express. You saved every man here today. You saved me." Tucker looked at the tin in his hands, then at the burning Panzers, then at the lieutenant. He thought about his father, crushed in the darkness. He thought about the years of humiliation, of being treated as less than because he came from poverty and dirt. "Sir," he said quietly, "some lessons can't be taught in classrooms. Some skills can't be bought with money. Sometimes the most valuable thing a man has is what he learned from surviving when everyone said he wouldn't." The battlefield grew quiet as the last fires burned. Medics moved through the positions, tending to the wounded. Baker Company had lost men, too many men, but without Tucker's impossible accuracy through the fog, they would have lost everyone. Tucker sat in his foxhole, his tobacco tin resting in his lap. His hands were finally still. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by exhaustion so deep it felt like the weight of the entire war pressing down on his shoulders. Private Davis brought him coffee, terrible army coffee that tasted like mud and miracles. "You know they're going to write about this, right, Sarge? What you did today. It's going to be in the history books." Tucker smiled weakly. "History books don't care much about coal miners, kid. They'll probably say it was good luck or German incompetence." But he was wrong. Within hours, word had spread up the chain of command. A staff sergeant had single-handedly stopped a Panzer assault using a homemade rangefinder made from a tobacco tin. Reporters were already being dispatched. Generals wanted explanations. The impossible had happened, and everyone wanted to know how. Lieutenant Pearson had radioed a full report to battalion command, but he had done something more important. He had told the truth. He had admitted his mistake, admitted that he had tried to ban the very tool that saved them all, admitted that his prejudice against Tucker's background had nearly cost every man their lives. It was the kind of honesty that could end a career. But Pearson had decided that integrity mattered more than rank. 2 days later, a colonel arrived at their position. He asked to see Sergeant Tucker and the legendary tobacco tin. Tucker showed him, explained the principles, demonstrated how he calculated distances using sound waves, angles, and instinct developed from years in the mines. The colonel listened carefully, then asked a question nobody had asked before. "Sergeant, would you be willing to train others? To teach this technique?" Tucker looked at his tin, then at the men of Baker Company watching from their positions. These boys who had seen him save their lives. These soldiers who now looked at him not as an uneducated hillbilly, but as the man who had pulled them back from the edge of oblivion. "I'll teach anyone who wants to learn, sir. But I gotta be honest with you. What I do, it can't be fully taught. It's something you gotta live through. You gotta spend years in the dark, years being told you're not good enough, years surviving when the world wants you dead. That's what makes this tin work. Not the metal, not the mirrors, the man holding it." The colonel nodded slowly. "Nevertheless, we'd like you to try. And Sergeant, effective immediately, you're being recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross. What you did here saved not just Baker Company but potentially the entire defensive line. If those Panzers had broken through, the consequences would have been catastrophic." Tucker felt something strange. Not pride exactly, more like validation. All those years of being invisible, being dismissed, being treated as less than because of where he came from. And now, in the frozen hell of the Ardennes forest, the world had finally seen what he had always known. That survival makes you stronger than any privilege ever could. That poverty teaches lessons no school can match. That sometimes the boy from the coal mines knows something the Harvard graduate doesn't. Lieutenant Pearson approached as the colonel left. He held out his hand. Tucker shook it. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for what I said to you," the lieutenant said quietly. Tucker smiled. "Just treat the next guy better, sir. That's all any of us can ask." Spring 1946. West Virginia. William Tucker stood outside the entrance to the mine where his father had died 14 years earlier. But he wasn't there to go down into the darkness. He was there to teach. The war had ended. Tucker had survived, had come home with a chest full of medals, including the Distinguished Service Cross. But more important than the medals was what he carried in his pocket. The same tobacco tin that had saved Baker Company in the Ardennes forest. Around him stood 20 young veterans, men who had fought in Europe and the Pacific, men who had seen things no human should see. They had come from across the country to learn from the sergeant who had done the impossible with a piece of scrap metal and instinct. But Tucker wasn't teaching them about rangefinders. He was teaching them something deeper. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing off the mine entrance, "what I'm about to show you isn't about tools or techniques. It's about understanding that your struggles don't make you weak. They make you capable of things others can't imagine. Every one of you survived hell. That survival is your greatest weapon." He opened his tobacco tin, the same one his father had carried, the same one Lieutenant Pearson had thrown in the mud, the same one that had calculated the death of 11 Panzers through impossible fog. "This tin didn't save those men because it's magic. It saved them because I spent my childhood in darkness, learning to see without eyes, learning to measure without instruments, learning that when the world takes everything from you, you find strength in places others never look." Private Davis was there too, no longer a terrified 19-year-old, but a young man who had found his purpose. He had stayed in touch with Tucker after the war, had become like a son to him. Lieutenant Pearson had also written multiple letters filled with gratitude and reflection. He had left the military, had gone back to Harvard not as a student but as a teacher. He was teaching leadership courses, and in every class, he told the story of the sergeant who taught him that wisdom comes from experience, not privilege. Tucker finished his class as the sun set over the West Virginia hills. The veterans thanked him, shook his hand, and one by one, they left. But they carried something with them now, the understanding that their pain had purpose, that their survival meant something. Tucker looked at his tobacco tin one last time before putting it back in his pocket. His father would have been proud, not of the medals or the recognition, but of the fact that his son had taken the lessons learned in darkness and used them to bring light to others. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If it moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Drop a comment below telling us what story you'd like to hear next. Stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things are what we're all about. Because sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones born into greatness. They're the ones forged in darkness, carrying tobacco tins and the memories of fathers who taught them that survival is the greatest teacher of all. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that their struggles have made them stronger than they know. We'll see you in the next story.